you are not alone in innovation journey. You are a policymaker within Turkey, but you are not alone. You could face some challenges, but these challenges are not specific for yourself. Your colleague in Ukraine, your colleague in France, your colleague in Uzbekistan could face the same problem, but you could consider the methodology as a very golden step of the innovation process. That was the main learning of the fellowship.
100 connected minds for human flourishing.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet that we share together. My name is Annette De Graaf, and this is the 100 Connected podcast. In today's episode, we will be learning about an educational innovation called the HB Cambridge Partnership for Education EdTech Fellowship, which is part of the 100 Global Collection 2026. During this conversation, we will explore what this fellowship offers, why it was created, and the value that it brings to leaders working across education systems around the world. But before we dive deeper into the innovation itself, it is important that we first get to know the people who made this fellowship possible, the innovators behind it, as well as a fellow who has experienced this program firsthand and will be sharing her perspective with us today. So here are our guests. We are joined by Jane Mann, the Managing Director of the Partnership for Education at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Jane has worked in the education sector for nearly 3 decades, supporting system-level change across diverse contexts by bridging research, policy, and practice. And we're also joined by Mayank Dhingra, Director and Global Head of Education Business and Strategy at HP. Mayank leads HP's global education portfolio and works closely with ministries of education around the world, focusing on leadership, capacity building, and system-level transformation at scale. And we are joined by Sümeyye Hatice Eral, Head of Department for Digital Skills at the Ministry of National Education in Turkey. Sümeyye brings the vital perspective of public sector leadership and has also participated in the fellowship herself, offering insight into how this innovation is experienced from within the national education system. But before we talk about systems, programs, and leadership at scale, I would like to begin somewhere more personal. And so I would love to take our listeners back in time, and I would like to hear from you if you can remember the moment or perhaps a period in your life when your fire for education started to burn. Like, what happened? Please take us back in time. Jane, can you start with that?
Yes, I have quite a memorable moment when it was more that I was so powerfully reminded of the responsibility of education. And it was when I saw some textbooks that were created for Afghan refugees in Pakistan during the period of conflict in Afghanistan between Russia and the US. And these textbooks were deliberately using violent imagery to try and normalize it for school-age kids. These were literacy books. They were numeracy books. These weren't kind of complicated books around geopolitics. And that stark contrast between the responsibility we have to shape young minds to be flourishing around this deliberate use of imagery to turn them into something which could be used by political groups or whatever for gain, kind of plonked me into that middle of we have to make sure that everything that we are doing is geared towards what works best for the child, for society, for human flourishing. So for me, it's not a particularly jolly moment, but it was definitely a moment that I come back to a lot around why I do what I do.
Wow, thank you for that, Jane. That really helps to sketch a picture for us. It was not like a very happy, jolly moment, but it's important.
But it was the moment.
It was the moment. Yes, thank you. How about you, Mayank? Can you explain to us when or where that fire for education inside of you started to burn?
That side of me that you might not have known about is that I'm also a yoga teacher. So I've been teaching for the last 2 decades plus. And I run a non-profit entity around it. And we support 3 children's shelters, one in India, one in Nepal, and one in Africa. And for me, I think about a decade back, I had my midlife crisis moment where I said that I need to be doing something more meaningful with my day job. And it should reflect my moonlighting time, which was, teaching yoga and running the nonprofit. So I sort of put that thought out there, and then I think serendipity took over. Within a month of me wanting to sort of make a move, I was headhunted by the GEMS Education Group, and I, a few conversations later, joined them to head their commercial organization. And I remember very clearly sitting with Dino, our CEO at that time, 3 months into the role. And I said, Dino, I came in with rose-tinted glasses, but they have stayed on. I found my home in education. So I think for me, it was that moment of, clarity that I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful with my day job. And I had a great day job at that stage. I was heading the Global Technology Partnerships for Emirates Groups, a job that I was very much enjoying, but I just wanted to do something more around education. And it was just one of those moments that strikes you and you knew you need to make a change.
My goodness, that's so inspiring. Thanks for sharing that. And Sümeyye, I would love to hear from you. When did it all start for you, that fire about that passion? When did that start?
I think there are several moments when I go for the answer based on this question, because I was born into a family where my parents are both teachers. Therefore, I really value the teaching professions from the moment I was born. I always take my free time in schools, going to schools with my parents. So I really love being at school, but even though I was very young during my childhood, it was the first moment that I really appreciated the teaching profession. The second one is the first day of my school. When I was at the first grade, I was really surprised that looking at my first class teacher, my classroom teacher, she was so attractive. She was very successful in managing the classroom. And I remember saying that, wow, teaching is a very, very valuable profession. That is the second moment. And the third moment was during my university degree. During the university, I really see that education is a really, really powerful tool that everyone needs to invest in. That is the moments that I could share with you.
That is amazing to hear that also a person can be like the accelerator of your passion, right? If somebody shows you that. And how amazing is it that we nowadays can also be that for other people? So that sounds really fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And what really strikes me is that despite our different roles, today, there's a strong sense of purpose and responsibility running through them. So let's connect that personal motivation to what we are doing now. So maybe Jane, you can start, and Mayank, you can add to that. So from your perspective, why was there a need for this fellowship? Like, what gap in system leadership were you seeing that made you think something like this has to exist?
That's a great question. And I think it came from the fact that we had been working at Cambridge with education systems for a long time. In fact, our longest running relationship with an education system is over 100 years. So, Cambridge, we have been immersed in these systems, and you spot what's going on for these system leaders. And I think with the acceleration of technology in the system, leaders were having to deal with expected transformations across entire contexts, and they were drowning. Where do I get the evidence to know whether or not the decisions I'm making are appropriate? How do I make sure that I'm spending public funds wisely? How do I make sure that everything I'm centered on is around what works best for the teacher and learner? Also, how do I connect with all of the other people across the system that I need to connect with in order to do this? And fundamentally, how am I going to lead the change? Because any transformation program is, by its nature, a program of change. And we quite often found ourselves in the conversations once key decisions had been made. And we were then trying to help the system to react and adapt to the key decisions. And so really it was a desire to support education leaders in making those decisions in a way that was most appropriate, and knowing that they had that coalition for change around them and that they could confidently lead that change. So the original idea of how can we support came from just being in the room when we can see the conflicting motivations, the number of things that these people are having to juggle. Policymaking is really hard. And because we're down in the classroom level as well, we work all across the spectrum. We could see where policy wasn't being implemented. It might have been like a beautifully written policy, but if it doesn't exist in your classroom, it never happened. So it was a desire to make sure that we could strengthen that. And the only way that you can really strengthen that is you have to start way upstream with how are those decisions being made and how can we support them being made better. But we can't do that on our own, which is where my friend Mayank comes in.
It's always fascinating to hear the two sides of the story, right? And while I think Jane and her organization was so well entrenched into education, for us, the wake up moment was probably COVID. I think so much change in education at that stage, especially the fact that the physical pathways were really being now replaced by digital pathways, and everybody from educators to policymakers were struggling to make sense of the new environment, right? The new phygital environment, as I call it, the digital and the physical coexisting. And so we said, how do we take a step back and support educators and policymakers on this new journey of becoming far more comfortable with technology in the classroom? So we created two programs. One was HP IDEA, HP Innovation and Education Digital Education Academy, which supports teachers on understanding technology and using frameworks from leading universities on how to adopt technology and create outcomes. But then we said, educators and school leaders are one constituent of the classroom, and the ones responsible for national transformation, the policymakers themselves, also need support in truly understanding what does EdTech today mean and how do you support policy around that EdTech. And so for us, the conversation with Jane and team became very pertinent because both of us had the same objective, and we were bringing two sort of complementing thought processes to it. And really that's where we started. We started, like I said, like a startup, drawing this out in a over a dinner conversation on a napkin in Lusaka. And 6 months later, we had a program that I think has now gone from strength to strength, supporting policymakers across 50 countries. 100 odd policymakers, senior policymakers have been on the program. And I think we've been truly able to support them on their journey of understanding what EdTech today means, how to drive transformation around that, and how to really build a coalition of change. I think the personal leadership aspect that we're offering under this program, as well as been of immense help to policymakers. So I think what we started out as an objective has not only been delivered, but I think we've exceeded where we thought we would be at this stage.
And I wish I still had that napkin because we genuinely sat down in Lusaka and just said, well, what could we do?
Yeah,
I
but
love
I think
that. Great story.
Thank you. I think it's, I'm sure Sümeyye has her perspective to add to this, but just before she goes there, I think for two legacy organizations like ours to move at the nimble and agile sort of manner that we did to co-create this has been nothing short of remarkable, because you take a 700, 800-year-old organization like Cambridge and almost a 100-year-old organization like ours, and then you take the frameworks that exist around that and try and match that to something that you're trying to create completely fresh. It isn't easy, but I think the universe was with us.
Yes, that sounds so amazing. And then also knowing that so many leaders from all around the world are participating, are benefiting from all of this. And then now we want to hear from one of the fellows. So Sümeyye, can you explain to us how you experienced the fellowship yourself? Like what shifted for you as a leader during or after the program?
First of all, I'm very, very happy to hear the story of the fellowship program, because professionally and personally, I was very, very inspired, and I'm very happy to be a part of this program, because when I decided to join the program, I was not expecting it to be a very great structure. It really surprised me to have that structure and the model and different mindsets of the people. As a policymaker working on digital education for many years, I'm always thinking about how innovation can really work inside the classroom. That is the real question to ask ourselves. So I applied the fellowship because I really love learning. I'm very passionate about learning for my professional journey. That is my story. I applied because I didn't want to stay in my policy bubble. I want to get out of the bubble, discover what is going on in the real classroom and how the other fellows or how the other peers work with the innovation within their context. That is my main motivation to be a part of this program. I wanted to be a part of a community, and my expectation really met within this program because I really met great people, great ideas and great model of learning with different backgrounds. So it is not just like discovering new tools, new technologies, but it is about changing your mindset through technology. Technology in education is more than discovering a tool. It is more than a software or a gadget. So you had the main idea, you had the main approach, how innovation could take place in teaching and learning. Where is the technology? Where is the teachers? Where is the students? You should see how it fits into that real context. That's why I love the fellowship model, fellowship structure. So it is not limited to technology for technology's sake.
Can you explain a little bit more about that mindset shift that you talked about?
Yeah, sure. For me, the real highlight was not a specific tool or a piece of software. I need to highlight it because throughout the course, throughout the program, we ask the question, what is the real problem you are trying to solve? That is our main objective. Rather than going into discovering a new tool, going into a new technology to discover it, first we were frequently reminded that just think about the problem you are trying to solve, how technology could support you. Maybe it may not be a technology, but it could be a process, it could be a project, or it could be a policy. That was the main idea we got. So I believe that education is an ecosystem. It is not just about the classroom, not limited to teacher or the skill builds, not limited to school building as well. You have the students, you have the teacher, you have the school administration, you have the curricula, you have the platforms or the other tools. But we are all reminded that students are at the center, teachers are the facilitators, and technology is a tool. That was the real mindset we were told, and we think about that ecosystem throughout the course. That was very, very impressive to have as a mindset throughout the program.
I love that you're saying that about like the whole ecosystem or like the whole learning community, right? That everybody works together. I often talk about the golden triangle between actually school, parents, and educators. Yeah. But now that I think about it, it's actually way more than that. It goes beyond that because there is so much more above that that gets to decide, right? That gets to put those systems in place. And I am wondering, like for all three of you, how can you make sure that you stay connected with the ones that it's all about, our learners, the children, and of course the educators on the floor, on the work field? How do you stay like while creating systems, while thinking about systems? Because often as an educator, wherever you are around the world, you're like, well, these people in an office, they get to decide for us, right? That is often what you hear. But so I'm wondering, how do you stay close together? It's like an ecosystem that you support each other instead of like having a hierarchy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is about co-creation, and that's something that
Yeah.
it's that, when as Sümeyye has put it, how to make sure that innovation is happening inside the classroom, you need to know what the classroom is like. And the people who can bring that information to you and that knowledge to you the best are the teachers. It's also obviously incredibly important to work with students and understand that. But when we're talking about big system change like this, let's be in no doubt that the key factor in the success of these programs is going to be teachers, because they're the ones who are going to have to use, interpret, work with, adapt policy in order to make it valuable for their classroom. So co-creation is incredibly important, particularly in technology, because what is possible might be wildly exciting and very impressive and very shiny. Whether or not it's actually effective is completely different. So one of the reasons that we chose to make our regionally specific was because we want the fellows to be able to sit together with people whose classrooms are not a million miles away from what their classrooms look like. So Sümeyye's classrooms will not be a million miles different from other people within, other policymakers within the fellowship. Whereas, sometimes you see pairings where it's just, there's such a gulf between the contextual reality of what's being dealt with. So I think that co-creation, making sure that in identifying the problem that you're trying to solve, you're making sure it's the right problem. And that's being close to your teachers and your school leaders. And then when you're trying to solve the problem, working with them to make sure that what you're creating is usable, implementable, and it's something that is infused throughout the system. I mean, Mayank and I are equally keen about making sure that we are visiting schools and understanding and talking to teachers as well. And I forgot to mention at the inception of the program as well, we had a head of education technology within Cambridge at the time, Julia Citron, who was absolutely passionate about listening to teachers and learning from them as well. So I think above all, it's just about co-creation and not assuming that you know the answers when you're not in the hotspot.
I think take a three-pronged approach to that, from a layered perspective, right? So for me, one is that how am I personally listening to the voices of students and what's happening there. So I sit on the board of a K-12 school. I sit on the board of 3 universities. So I remain sort of, connected to the ground, if you like to call it that. So I'm hearing firsthand what students are saying at these universities and schools on what's happening in their sort of universe of technology and future skills and, aspirations and emotions and everything that's going around in their teenage and young adulthood life. As an organization, we remain close to this by running programs such as, for example, HP Futures. So HP Futures is a think tank that I run, with Jane is part of as well. And there we very conscious to bring in the voices of the students. So in the current one, which is the HP Futures 2025 edition, where we were looking at the intersection of AI and what that means for students, we actually surveyed students from 21 countries and asked them what they felt about their future in correlation to AI. Did they feel more secure because of AI? Did they feel less secure? Did they feel that AI has got enough guardrails around it? Does it not have enough guardrails? And so on and so forth, right? So we put a fair amount of questions to them to understand what they are thinking about their future and about technology. And third, I think through the programs that we run, the HP Cambridge EdTech Fellowship, the HP Gaming Garage, where we teach students how to code and design through the gaming door, or HP Idea, where teachers run their own capstone projects and are close to students and involve students in that. We again hear from the students what they're feeling about these projects, the capacity building programs that we are bringing. So I think for me it's a layered approach, right? Personal, organizational, and indirectly through the policymakers and teachers that we have on our programs.
Sümeyye, when you hear that, do you have something to add to that, or
maybe one more point to highlight will be dialogue. The program had the main message dialogue between the sector and between the public-private organizations. So there was a kind of dialogue between different sectors, and also the dialogue between the participants could be added, because as Jane and Mayank stated, there were very diverse participants to the program that we met during the fellowship program. So it was the dialogue. Even though we come from the different backgrounds, even though we come from the different countries, we managed to meet at a common point. So this was achieved through a very strong dialogue, strong collaborations, and the main passion for solving a problem in education could be added.
So now I'm curious, like during the fellowship, Sümeyye, what was like a golden moment for you? What was like a moment that will stay with you forever?
Let me think for that question, because there were several aha moments throughout the program, but the real highlight was not a specific moment, but as a moment to understand that we, all of us joining the program, managed to solve a specific. So that could be also considered as a aha moment or a golden moment, or could be considered as a success as well, because it was the real fruit of the program. Therefore, it is more than a gold moment, but it is much more to describe it. Let me just state that that moment stands out not just a single event, but a shift in how I approach my work. That was the main win of the program. I already believed in a people-first approach. That is my personal and professional approach, of course, but the fellowship helped me strengthen that idea and to apply it more deliberately. After I completed the program, like many people in my position, there can be a tendency to start with tools, gadgets, softwares, or hardwares if you consider innovation in education, of course. But the fellowship has given us the message to deeply understand the problem and the perspectives of the people involved throughout the program. We deployed the design thinking process throughout the fellowship, program, and we had the time to listen and understand the actors involved throughout the innovation or the technology deployment process. That was the golden moment. It is not just like about developing a new project, developing about a new process, but it is about understanding the real needs of the classroom setting. That was the gold moment. So it is not just a limited moment that I could share, but it is how affected my thinking, how affected how I work through my work. So it was a clear aha moment for me to realize my work in the ministry. It is not just to open, it is not limited to opening new doors for innovation, but it is not limited, it is not like limited to bringing new technology. You need to open new doors. You need to understand different perspectives. You need to have the empathy for the ones involved in the education process, but it is not creating a red tape about the innovation, I could say.
But when I hear you talk about that, it also sounds like it felt like a boost, like to the things that are already inside of you, like your values and like how you approach your work and everything that you do in your life, like people first, right? And then hearing that from others and having people from all around the world with you there, and then the whole fellowship program telling you that, or like helping you understand that even more, can give such a boost to everything that you do. And I think also when I think about 100, the whole organization, and meeting fellow innovators from all around the world, it's like you have this thing inside of you that you believe in, that you feel is important. And the saying of, we can run really fast by ourselves, right? But we can come further when we are together. So maybe it's also the togetherness of the fellowship.
I think that's a really important point. And one of the literal togetherness moments in the fellowship, which I think is a very important one, is that the program is between about 4 to 5 months, depending on each cohort. But it kind of has this peak moment of a study week in Cambridge, where all the fellows come together and have some of these sessions face to face, and they stay in one of the colleges. There's a lot of time spent together, right, Sümeyye? You're kind of intensively in each other's pockets for a week. But it's so interesting to watch. So there's always a dinner as part of this week. And this dinner is like the kind of dinner you'd go to at a like 25-year reunion of your university friends. You know, these people are connecting with each other as if they've known each other their whole careers, their whole lives, because they've already spent that intensive time working through part of the program. They finally get to meet each other for the first time. And during that study week, you know, they can be quite emotional sessions, some of those. So it's so lovely to watch what happens at that dinner when people are greeting each other, like I said, as though like they've known each other their whole lives, and finally they're seeing each other again. And I think that speaks to what Sümeyye was talking about the vulnerability-based trust type side of things that the fellowship creates. In order to really bring your true whole self to the fellowship, you have to admit to your mistakes. You have to recognize where perhaps in the past you weren't taking a fully evidence-based approach, or you could have done something differently. And, you know, these things are all forgiven. We're all human, but it's so much more helpful for your fellows if you can say, let me tell you about a time when actually I got it wrong. Knowing you're in an environment where people will support you in that and you can learn from it together. So I think the togetherness of it is that's why it's called a fellowship, right? It's clues in the name.
It absolutely does. Yes. My goodness, that sounds magical when you describe that. Mayank, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, let me add 3 perspectives of 3 other fellows who are not present on the call, which for me were those aha moments and wow moments, right? And they were for them probably personally as well. So, you know, we had a gentleman called Stanton from South Africa on the Africa cohort. And I very vividly remember one of his statements that really made me take a step back and think, right, about the power of this program. He said, this is the first time I'm truly understanding Africa. So you would think, here is a fellow from Africa who should probably know Africa very well, right? He's from the continent. But he says, this is the first time I'm opening my eyes to Africa and understanding how diverse we are and yet how, you know, common we are. So I think that was, you know, for me, a very powerful moment to say that this is the door we have opened for these policymakers, that they are now able to see the context of the wider community, wider continent, and still learn from that and so on. And then I remember from Uzbekistan, on Sümeyye's cohort, we had Muzaffar, who's a rector of a public sector university and also works for the ministry. And he said, you know, I have missed this so much, this chance and opportunity to be a student again. Because everything in my role now is that I have to be the adult and I have to lead and I have to do everything. For me to be again a student and keep absorbing and learning, he says that has been priceless for me in this program, right? And for a rector of a public sector university to say that, I think was phenomenal. And from the Asia cohort, we also had Ivan, who's the Director General of Indonesia MOE at that stage. And Ivan said, for me, this is my global village now, and we need to take care of each other. So for him to have that sense of community about all the fellows and that desire to support each one of them, and I've seen that through his time here as a fellow and then as an alumnus, how he has gone out of his way to support the other fellows. So I think that those have been those aha moments for me, right, where we felt we have created something far bigger than what we had initially set out to do.
So when I hear you all talk like full of passion, it really makes me think about how you're not only helping learners and educators and school leaders thrive and flourish in life, but you're all doing the same thing. So you're not only doing this for others, but also for yourself, right? This is something so important. It's like contagious, your energy, your enthusiasm. And I believe that you cannot make a change without that enthusiasm, without that authentic motivation that you all have here. That is fantastic. And that is one thing that we all as innovators share with each other. And here at the 100 Connected podcast, that is also why it started, because we are so connected because of our passion for education, because of our fire for education. And hearing those examples of these real life moments that came to life because of you, because of that conversation that you had together, because of that initiative that you took, because of the steps, the action that you made happen. That is just fantastic. So going back in time, like when you first had that idea, and to see what happened now. So we have a bit of an understanding of what happened in between. And now we're here, but there's so much more to come. So I'm curious about, so Sümeyye, now your fellowship, in which part of the process are you now? And where are you now and where do you want to go?
It is a very good question, but it is very deep, because the fellowship program brought me into a new version of me, who said to me that, Sümeyye, don't stop learning. Go on for your passion. That was the message I had at the end of the program. So the fellowship program was not limited to a certificate. It is an ongoing process because we are still connected through our network. I know that if I face a problem within Turkey, within Ankara, I'm based in Ankara, I know that one of my colleagues living in another country could consider a solution to the challenge I'm facing. I'm not looking for the technology to solve the problem I am facing, but I'm looking for a colleague who could I rely on their guidance. That is what I had as a very golden experience after completing the fellowship program, because it told us you are not alone in innovation journey. You are a professional, you are a policymaker within Turkey, but you are not alone. You could face some challenges, but these challenges are not specific for yourself. Your colleague in Ukraine, your colleague in France, your colleague in Uzbekistan could face the same problem, but you could consider the methodology as a very golden step of the innovation process. We are taught to test new methodologies. We are taught to consider the root causes of the problems, root causes of the challenges you face, and understand the human factor of the innovation cycle. That was the main learning of the fellowship. I could summarize, but there are very, very deep learning process of the fellowship. It is the dialogue, it is the perspective, it is the methodology, but maybe I could give a very technical perspective. Work for the digital education practices many years, but the fellowship program was one of the best structured. I experienced hybrid learning. It is a very, very well structured. It is not limited to technology, but it is limited to learning itself. It gives you a very strong community. It gives you very strong dialogue. It gives you the message that you are not alone in the innovation journey. We are here to help. methodology is there just to guide you that could be considered as the golden message of the fellowship journey.
Yeah, so it sounds like normally when you finish like a course or whatever, or a workshop, you get a certificate and then it's done. But this is so much more than that, right? The value of those connections, that network, that new family kind of you gained, that is worth so much more than like, here is a certificate. So that sounds so valuable.
That network is incredible. We now have, I think, around 100 fellows across about 50 countries. So this is genuinely, when Mayank and I were first discussing this, the idea was a global network. And what Sümeyye has just said is wonderful to hear, because we can plan it all we like, but actually, unless fellows like Sümeyye really bring their whole self to it and are prepared to go with the mindset that Sümeyye did, it doesn't work. So actually, we do spend a lot of time on selection, because we want those groups to fit well. But then once their own fellowship program is over, they are now fellows. And being a fellow is not a time-bound event, and you get out what you put in. So that network now exists as a group, but also in so many myriad little versions of people having bilaterals, people forming small groups to discuss something else. And as Sümeyye said, that understanding that because you've been through this common experience, you have somebody who may not be in the office next to you, but absolutely is right next to you to support you when you're going through some of your big decisions. I also think it's absolutely amazing. You know, Sümeyye talked about focusing on the human factor in the innovation cycle. You realize that we haven't yet mentioned AI. I have now, I've broken the spell. But, you know, if we think that EdTech has been complex in terms of system disruption to date, it's just turbocharged now. So these networks, these human-centered networks, thinking about human-centered design in ways that strengthen our emotional intelligence rather than trivialize it, are more important than ever. And I think that, you know, to hear from Sümeyye about what that feels like is infinitely more important than just sort of a quantitative element of a result on a page. So it's really very lovely to hear that.
Yeah, and what you're saying here about like not having a colleague next door who understands you and like does the same things as you, it can feel so lonely, and it can
Absolutely.
feel right, and it can feel like, so like, where's my support? Like, why don't I have that? And when you do meet those people, it can feel really emotional, and it can feel really overwhelming to finally meet your people. So that is fantastic that you bring that with this program, and to hear that from you, Sümeyye. So now, before we end this episode of our podcast, there's one big question that we always ask our guests, and it can have something to do with what you're about this program, about the innovation, about the fellowship, but it can be something else too. So what is your big dream for the future of education? Mayank, can I start with you?
I think it sort of leads itself from this conversation that we were having, right? This ability to create these multinodal, many-to-many networks. I think eventually I would want to see education as a service available across the globe, right? So the ability to serve anybody, no matter what their circumstances are, on their education pathway from cradle to grave, you know, give them the learning journey, the tools that they need, and make that accessible. I think that would be, you know, the ideal scenario, education as a service available across, irrespective of environment and context.
That sounds beautiful. Thank you for that. And Sümeyye, how about you? What is your big dream for the future of education?
It is a very simple dream. I believe that in education should be accessible for all, and education should help people become better human beings. It is not limited to success. It is not limited to certificates or diplomas or the levels you get. Education is more than academic achievement, and it is supported by your character, your purpose in life, and your ability to think independently, and your skills you develop throughout your character development. So we must value empathy alongside excellence. We must value reflection alongside achievement throughout the education, and education should make us good human beings.
Wow. In Norway, we say heia, like for that, like when we support what you're saying. Heia for that. Yes. That sounds amazing. And then Jane.
I have a big hey for what both of my friends have just said there.
Yes, yes.
And it's really hard to add to that because, of course, I absolutely share both of those sides and the big dreams. I think also, if I go back to my original purpose as to why I got into this in the first place, my big dream is that education should never, ever forget who it serves. And those are the teachers and the students. That every single decision made by every policymaker, everything that we do when it comes to designing a curriculum and assessment, whatever it is done with that sensitivity of doing it in a way that will enable people to thrive rather than to reduce them to a marker in the system. And I think that that's absolutely achievable when we hang on to those core principles around human flourishing and around humans at the heart, not just humans in the loop.
Yeah, so we need to stay connected with ourselves, with each other. And this whole conversation, my goodness, I felt a big heya for everything that you said. And I would like to thank you for your insights, for your storytelling. And it gave us such a better understanding. Of course, when you see the words on the website, right, about your innovation and about the fellowship, we can read the words, we can see the video, but now we've got the emotions and the stories behind it. So I would really like to thank you so much for that, for being here today with me. And I can't wait from others who hear this episode or maybe see us on YouTube or on Spotify. I can't wait to hear the reactions, and maybe people get inspired and enthusiastic to join the fellowship too. And I'm sure they can find the information on your website, right?
Right.
That'll be great. So a big thanks to all of you, and hope to meet you in real life one day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
The 100 Connected podcast is a creation of the Connection Committee, Annette De Graaf, Sherelle Trippers, Hanika Mackey, and Lindsay Stewart, and is produced by 100 and edited by me, Alex Shapiro. Learn more about 100, its innovations, and our community by visiting our website at 100.org.